Okay, just a little bit more content I want to give you so that when you're reading Chekhov's Cherry Orchard, you're thinking about some of the key ideas that I want to focus on for our discussion of the play. Before I get into that, though, come on, look at this picture of Chekhov. Why did I not mention it when I showed this picture earlier? He is hugging a dog. You know how I feel about historic pictures with dogs in them. So, thank you, Chekhov, for your love of the dog. All right. I'm going to give you 6 characteristics of Chekhov's plays. These are things that we notice across his works of mature dramatic literature that were produced at the Moscow Art Theater. These are the kinds of characteristics that we mean in theater studies when we say that a play is Chekhovian. When it reminds us of Chekhov, it's usually because of these elements or some close relationship to these elements. So I want you to understand what makes Chekhov Chekhov. First 3 characteristics I'm going to discuss here very, very briefly, and then we'll talk about them again after you've read the play. So this is the setup for them. We're going to return to each of these next week. First of all of his mature plays are set in rural Russia. They're contemporary, they're local, they're not city plays, they're rural plays. Very often the characters have been in cities recently or as sort of part of their formative past, but they're not there now. They're living in this slower place, and usually it's a problem in some way. Or they are idealistic about what it would be like if they could get out of the rural place that they are living. But contemporary and rural Russia. All of these are connected, as you can probably imagine. So the second characteristic is that the plays focus on the boredom and monotony of the land-owning class. We see these people in the play. We see folks who have land, who own estates. We also see people who are their friends and neighbors or employees, but we do see the land-owning class. And what we notice consistently in his plays is that they have a lot of dissatisfaction in their lives. They may be at the top of the local food chain in terms of economics, but they are bored, they're frustrated, they're unsatisfied. That's a common characteristic in Chekhov's plays, which contributes to the third point. The plays focus frequently, and in different ways across the different characters, but frequently, on the gulf between desire and fulfillment. What do I mean by that? I mean that the characters observe about themselves that there are things they think would make them happy, but that they can't get there. They can't get to that thing. It could be a person. It could be a different job. It could be a different location to live. But something they feel like could make them happy. They're not happy. Something could make them happy, but they can't quite get there. They observe that about themselves. And we observe that they aren't happy also. Very often we think that what would make them happy is not what they think would make them happy. But we are aware of the gulf between their desires and the fulfillment of their desires. My fourth point about Chekhov, and a lot of times this is what is meant when somebody refers to another play as Chekhovian or like Chekhov. In Chekhov, we see that there is muted action on stage, climactic action off stage. So on stage, people will do things like make tea, fold sheets, talk about the weather, plan for a party that's not going to happen, or write a letter. Off stage, we have duels and fires and people getting married and people trying to shoot themselves. We don't see that stuff on stage. If this were a melodrama, to state the obvious, it would be reversed. In a melodrama, we see all the duels, all the fired shots. We see buildings topple and things blaze and blow up, right? And we don't spend time in a melodrama watching people fold their clothes or write a letter unless it's, the letter. But we still don't really watch them write it. We just watch them find it or hide it, right? But in Chekhov, we spend time on stage looking at very normal action, and the things that are exciting are not in the frame of the stage. Which brings us to the fifth point. The play puts attention not on the big events of the plot, but on the characters' psychological responses to events and to each other. Psychology, heredity, and environment. We are looking at how people behave, what they are doing, why they act the way they do. We're not looking at big, climactic, exciting things. We're looking at the small idiosyncrasies of the human heart. And speaking of the human heart, my sixth point is that characters in Chekhov's plays do not fully understand their own feelings. They'll give us a big monologue about themselves and their heart, but we observe that they're misapprehending themselves. They are misunderstanding what is bothering them. They're wrong about what would fix the situation. We notice different things about themselves than they are able to notice. Oh my gosh, what does that remind you of? Oh, I don't know, real life maybe? Right? In Chekhov, we don't see a playwright putting people on stage to speak philosophical words to make a point. Instead, we see really recognizable human beings stumbling through situations. And sometimes they're very frustrating, and sometimes they're ridiculous, and sometimes they break our hearts, and sometimes they make us angry. But they're awfully familiar. And the nervous laughter that we sometimes feel in Chekhov is the recognition that we aren't that much different than these ridiculous, fumbling people. And that's what I like about Chekhov. Okay, but we're going to talk about all of that more after you have read The Cherry Orchard. We'll talk about some of it after you read the first part and some of it after you read the rest of it. But we'll get through all of these and sort of pick apart how we see these 6 characteristics showing up in that particular play. I look forward to talking to you about it later. Bye.